All right, what's happening, party people? It's time for an early season ride and a brand new bike review. Stick around. So what's happening, friends of the interwebs? This is Pete with BackDraft Bikes. I got a new bike. Currently March 5th, I believe, and we still got snow. They even sanded the roads this morning, which is fantastic. But it's actually 51 degrees Fahrenheit, and I wanted to take out my new bike that I've been working on over the wintertime and give you a little bit of a review and an update on this awesome bike. This is a 22 BMW M Series S1000 XR. That's a lot of letters. I apologize. But this is a pretty cool bike. This is one of BMW's sport touring bikes. It's essentially their 1000 RR, if you will, in an upright version. So the S1000. And I've demoed these bikes on the channel before a couple times, and they're pretty cool. Few things I didn't like about the stock bike, which is going to get me into this heavily modified motorcycle in a second, talking about what I like about this one more. And no, it's not just because I own it, okay? So haters gonna hate, real talk. But this bike itself has a inline four-cylinder 999 cc's, and BMW, this motor's nice. I mean, this motor's tuned up in the sport bike, the RR Race Edition. I think it's like 208 horsepower. And this bike, I think it comes out of the can at like 160. And it's tuned a little differently, obviously, because what they're trying to go after is the sport touring long distance. So they don't want the crotch rocket feel 100%. But this is the M version, so there's some extra bits and pieces on it to make it a little bit more fancy. But also, the gentleman that had this before me was a professional bike tuner. And what this bike has on it, in collaboration with a guy I'm working with at the BT Tunes, this has a stage 2 kit on it. Velocity stacks, a different intake, relocation of the air temperature sensor for the air intake loop, tons of programming done, dynode, a full titanium race header on it, as well as the Akrapovic can. And this bike rips. I'm telling you, this bike rips. You can launch this bike from any RPM and you can feel the power. Now, this is what I'm going to talk about just for a second. I want to just talk about the stock bike for a second. These bikes are really cool because you do have an upright riding position. Your pegs are right below you, so you're not fully leaned over. Your bars are a little wide. They're a little bit raked back. This has risers on it too. Yes, this has like a 1-inch riser, so that makes it a little nicer. But what this bike does from the factory is provide you that instant grin of power that you're going to get with a sport bike, but you're not going to feel super uncomfortable after like 20 minutes of riding. And a lot of people say, don't whine about the riding position because you know what you're getting into when you get a sport bike. And I agree. But wouldn't it be cool to have the best of both worlds? To have some power, a lot of fun, and also not be super duper jammed up and able to move around. That to me, that's what I'd be into. So this bike really fills both of those niches. I will say though, I'm a diehard GS fan. Not as the only bike I've ever owned, but after trying them, I'm on my third one now. And I gotta say, those bikes got torque, they've got good power. You're not gonna go 100 million zillion miles an hour. I think they're limited at like $130, which is way too fast anyways for a big bike like that. Yeah, so what, they look like a cow. This bike though refines a lot of those pieces. You get a faster highway ride. The form factor on this bike is much more petite, you know, and it's an inline four, so you're dealing with a much narrower profile. And then everything about this bike race wise, you've got Brembos for the brakes, really, really good brakes on this bike. And that's the big reason right there why you want it, let's be honest. Daddy like. But the thing about this bike is it's bred from the R1000, or the S1000 RR, but tuned down so that it's a little bit more manageable for a middle-aged white dude like myself that wants to go and have a nice time. And that's why I've absolutely loved riding these bikes on the demos. Now that I have the opportunity to get one, I traded my old GS for this one, and I also happened to get another GS. I know it's a disease, but I have this bike in my new trophy, which we're going to be doing some videos on this year too. I got to tell you though, would I go across the country with one of these bikes? No. They are a little bit scrunchy for a 6'4" guy, but they are not small bikes by any means. And the comfort level on this bike is actually quite good. The suspension though is stiff. It has the ESA, electronically dampening suspension package, so it allows you to adjust on the fly. There is a huge difference between road and dynamic on this bike as far as suspension goes. The road mode really plushes it out. The dynamic mode really stiffens it up, so you get that race feel. But I will tell you, this bike on road mode is actually quite manageable on these type of crap roads that we have up here in Maine. It feels good in the hand, and it has a ton of power. The only issue with this bike's power band from the factory is that it's really, really flat until you get to like 4,000 RPMs. And I've mentioned this on my videos before, but if you look at the display, it tells me it has a 4, and the 4 is kind of big. And that's kind of telling you like, hey, if you want power, you've got to be around 4,000 RPMs. Because if you're in this low band between, you know, idle and 4,000, it'll go, but it ain't gonna be impressive. It's just, it doesn't make its power low. And that's an inline 4 for you. You also get the buzzy inline 4 feeling, although this bike, Gen 2, of the 1000 is much better than the first gen. When I rode the first gen, after about 10 minutes, it felt like I had cut a couple cord of wood on a chainsaw. This bike does not have that feeling at all. This bike feels great, and actually doesn't really have much vibration at all. You could probably even put bar end mirrors on, weights on this to really tame it down. I do have bar end mirrors on this. The guy did this. So why am I absolutely head over heels for this bike right now as it stands? Well, the guy tuned it, and there's no dead spot below 4,000 anymore. The quick shifter feels like a quick shifter, and there's no top end limit either. But not that I would know, I'm just saying. But just that the tuning, which I'll put links in the description for, dramatically changes this bike's behavior. It dramatically changes it. I mean, it makes this bike night and day different. Dynoed, we just dynoed it. With the new tunes, it's right around 190 horsepower. The torque is still not up there like the GS, but it's fast, and the bike handles. Now, I'm not really pushing it too much because I don't want to wash out on any sand, but you should know that this bike handles like a rail. The suspension on it, when turned into dynamic mode, stiffens up, and it handles like an actual sport bike. The cruising RPMs, again, anything below 4,000 with the tune really wakes the bike up, but it's it really likes its power up above 4,000 RPMs. And you'll see that in my other videos when I ride these stock too. So, I've mumbled a lot about this bike. I want to talk a little bit more about the power that it has and the sound that it has. We took the standard chrome header off. I mean, can you feel that? Can you? Took the chrome header off, put the titanium full-on Akrapovic race header, relocated the sensors in the airbox so that it runs full loop, and put on an Akrapovic can. I have a race can for it too, but you're deaf if you use it for more than 2 minutes. So this can has a nice loud noise to it, but it's not obnoxious. I also like the flapper delete, the little valve thing that they have to reduce noise. That has been removed as well, and you put a little CAN bus module in there so you don't get the check engine light. That right there, my friends, is amazing. Look, it even moved the camera down. There we go. Yeah, that right there, my friends, is actually amazing. With a bike like this, there are a few other considerations you really need to take into mind. First off, the seating position. The seats on these are pretty hard. They want you to stay planted because they know you're going to ride it like a sport bike. Some people do buy aftermarket seats for these, but the reviews on them, from my scouring of the web, are all over the place. Some people love them. Other people are just like, this is the most awful thing I've ever done to a bike as far as the seat goes. This is the M version. And I guess the sports seat is the same as the M version from what I've read. And I don't find the seat to be uncomfortable at all. I rode this bike back from Connecticut, which is about 4 hours. And I thought it was just fine. I really didn't have any complaints about it. The heat from the hand grips in the cold weather is a little bit to be desired. If you're going to ride this bike like a GS, I wish they would have put a little bit more chest hair into the hand grips because they're not very powerful, but they still do have a good amount of heat. On setting 3 though, I found my hands getting cold on my GS. If I had my hand grips turned all the way up to 5, you can't even hold the handlebars because it's so stinking hot. There is no seat heater option for this. And unfortunately, the GS, they still haven't reintroduced those yet. Maybe on the 1300s, they're going to offer them back. I think that's super lame. Like every other bike manufacturer out there that's making long-distance touring adventure bikes understands we're riding in bad weather. So, you know, what, BMW, if you're listening, why did you do that? The display on this, exactly the same as the other GS that I've had and the GS that I got. They haven't changed it at all. And why should they? Because you know what? The layout and everything on it's fantastic. I mean, it's great. One of the cool things about the S Series bikes is you can change the way that the display looks very easily just by holding, going into the menu feature. Let me not crash, hold on. Just by going into the menu feature and going over to the sport mode, which is only one click over on the familiar Wonder Wheel, it gives you an entirely new display that allows you to show your dynamic traction control, the brake levels, your lean angle, and obviously in big font, your RPMs. And I'll tell you, the lean angle on this is quite sensitive. Watch this. See? It's really reactive. There's no lag at all. There's also another mode. If you click right on the Wonder Wheel, it will put it into track mode. You can actually do laps, which is kind of cool if you're trying to time yourself on this. Would I call this a track bike? I don't know. I think you could definitely put it on the track, no problem asked, but you'd need some really good tires. Because you're sitting up a little bit higher. It's kind of like the S1000 RR on stilts. I think that's a good way to put it. But is it top heavy? No, not at all. It's not top heavy, and it wants to go into the corners real easy. Like, you can easily push this bike around, and it does its thing with no questions asked. There's a couple different other functions on the display, so I just put this back into another mode for track, and you can see you lose pretty much everything except for a really large screen for your RPMs, and it's kind of like a bar graph. It really looks like a race style setting now with the way that it's laid out. So super cool. I do like the fact that they gave you a few options for the screens. I mean, that's awesome. Why don't they do that on the GS? I don't know. Maybe it's just because I think old people are riding it. I don't know. Now again, comparing this back over to the GS just a little bit more, you're going to have more torque on the GS. I think the GS has a little bit more launch factor. When you crank on it, you can feel it a little bit more. This bike has explosive power, but you've got to be in the power band to really feel it. It gets out of its way below 4,000 RPMs, don't get me wrong, especially with all these tunes and the intake on it. But it doesn't have that same neck jerk reaction that you do with the 1250 down low, because you're missing a lot of torque. I think the 1250 stock has more torque than this bike, which is kind of crazy to think the horsepower difference between those. I think the GS is around 135 horsepower. This one comes stock with way more than that, like around $160 or so. The comparing this to the RR, which I've ridden quite a few times as well, the RR is nice, but you're really scooched up. The foot controls are actually back set quite a bit, and you do feel that, especially if you're riding with any sort of boots on. At least for my size 14 shoes, and yes, I like to ski without skis, I found it was actually quite difficult to shift. Very difficult trying to get my foot in to shift. But I also found that to be the case on the R18s, the new cruisers. I had a hard time shifting because my foot was too big. I don't know, do the German people have small feet? What's the deal? But this bike, again, gets you the upright riding position. The pegs are right below you, and quite comfortable. So I have no problem shifting. Now, I'll just talk a little bit more about the performance package on this. With the quick shifter and the Brett tunes that I did on this bike, this quick shifter is unbelievable. I mean, it really comes into its own. The quick shifter on the GS sometimes feels like you're sticking a pencil in a jar of marbles and cranking it around. This one, just, there's nothing to it. That's me shifting. Isn't that amazing? It's not jerky at all. It's exactly the way it should be. Allows you to drop multiple gears, go up gears, whatever you want to do. It doesn't mind. So I'm right over at 4,000 now. I'm in the power band. You can feel this bike. It's kind of like my dog when I tell it, you want to go for a ride in the truck? Starts shaking. This bike wants to go when you get it over 4,000. So keep in mind, if you ride one of these bikes, what you're going to have to do, if you want to feel that power, is get it up in RPMs. And that means dropping a gear or two if you really want to get into it. I really want to crank into it, but the roads are wet. See what I'm saying? Slow down, baby. The bike's just, it's just raw power above 4,000, and it doesn't really let down until redline. Cool thing too, this bike has a shift light on it, so if you get up above redline, it starts blinking at you. It's quite funny. Now, if you go to Dynamic Pro, this bike also has wheelie control. And you might think, wheelie control? Well, that's stupid. You want it to wheelie. not necessarily. If you're going for maximum traction and you're trying to get going, you're quick shifting with one tire off the ground, you're gonna get yourself into some trouble. Because of the amount of power this bike has, the wheelie control actually does a really good job. What it does is it looks at the lean angle of the bike and the pitch, and it can tell if the bike is, you know, pitching backwards or forwards. The bike is already making adjustments to the suspension based on the pitch and the lean angles to stiffen and dampen. So with wheelie control on, it not only takes into account the suspension settings, but it also will clip the throttle back. I put 10,000 miles on one of the Harley Pan Americas, and that was the first adventure bike that I had actually had that had power. I did not have a GS before that. When I got on that bike, it's 150 horsepower. I mean, it's fast. It is fast. Their wheelie control and throttle clipping was terrible. It was almost like a two-stroke dirt bike, clipping off the ignition. Because when you get up into the higher RPMs, you'd feel the bike and it would start shuddering. Bom, 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 bom. And again, on a bike, to me, that's kind of dangerous. You want gentle movements, especially if you're cutting the throttle down and you're into it, and you're depending on the throttle to either hold your line or whatever. BMW doesn't do that. I have not felt that. Literally what it does is it just recharges the throttle ever so slightly. Very gracefully and very gently lets the throttle down so that you don't have any of the jerky motion. It's extremely controlled. So kudos to you, BMW, for the way that you do that so gracefully. And actually, if you weren't really paying attention, you wouldn't even know it. You would just think the bike was out of power, because that's kind of the feeling you get. Welcome to Effingham, buddy. That's really the name here. Effingham. There's Hobbs Road, yes, yeah. This is the first school in New Hampshire. I've been by this quite a few times on my videos. Actually, it says it's the first normal school. I don't know what the difference between normal and not normal. Well, I'm not normal, but I didn't go to school there. So again, 4,000. You're up in 4,000 RPMs. You're ground control to Major Tom. I mean, it's all systems go. All right, well, I've talked a lot about this bike. I'm going to be shooting a lot of videos this year with it because I've got it. I bought it originally just to flip it, but after riding it for a couple times, I can't get rid of it right yet. I've got to probably just keep it for the year and kind of see what happens after that. But I'm absolutely in love with the bike. If you're thinking about buying one of these XRs, throw some comments down below. Maybe if there's a question I can answer for you, I'm more than happy to do that. Out the door, these bikes are fantastic. With a little bit of tinkering and tuning, these bikes are unbelievable. So that's all I got for you today. As always, ride safe.